Hello, this is Basar. In this tutorial, I'm going to show you how we can use the Sequelize, the ORM library in Node.js application. Most of the Node.js tutorials are showing how to use NoSQL databases like Mongo. But in this one, I'm going to demonstrate how we can use a relational database with the Sequelize. You can check out this code repository and follow the steps I'm going to do in this tutorial. And the final version of the tutorial is here under the crud final branch. I've already cloned this one and it is opened in Visual Studio Code. Let's go over the project. It is just a simple project and let's check the package.json. Here we have the dependencies of the Express, Sequelize and SQLite. I'm going to use the SQLite for the database, but we can use the MySQL, PostgreSQL, or other popular relational databases for our application. But for simplicity, I'm going to use the SQLite. And also we have this node.mon dependency, and this is for restarting our application whenever we do any changes in our code. So it's a development dependency. And here our start script, which is just running the index.js, this file, with the node.mon. And in the index.js, we have this Express application created, and it is just listening this port 3000, and that's it. Now let's start our application. Running npm start here. So the app is running. Now let's start with the first thing, and that is the Sequelize instance for our application. Creating a new file here. Let's call this one database.js. And in this file, we are going to use the Sequelize coming from the dependency of Sequelize. Now we are going to create our own instance, and that is going to, let's call this one as Sequelize with the lowercase s. And this is going to be a new Sequelize. Now we are going to configure the Sequelize with the database information, and the first parameter is the database name. Let's call this one as testdb, and the second one is the username for our database. And since I'm going to use the SQLite, these are not really important, but if I would be using the Postgre or others, then this must be pointing to the real user and password. So I'm just going with this way, like this. This is going to be user, and the next one is the password. Third parameter is the password, and this is going to be like this one. And as a fourth parameter, I'm going to pass the options object. And in this options, we can define the dialect. This dialect is either the SQLite, the Postgre, the others, and since using SQLite, setting the SQLite here, and we set the host. And for this one, we can run the SQLite in memory mode. Like this, we can set the host as :memory:. In this case, the SQLite will be running in memory, and whenever our application is restarted, all the data will be gone. So this is suitable for the test environment, but for development environment, we would like to keep the data after each restart. So we can just point this to a file like this. Let's say we will have a file here like dev.sqlite. And this module is going to be exporting this instance we just created here, the Sequelize. So we are exporting this one, and let's use it here in the app, the index.js. Let's get the Sequelize from the database module, and we will run Sequelize sync. So this is going to be creating the database, and this is an asynchronous operation, so this is a promise. So we can get the result like this in the then. We can log that DB is ready. Let's save all these changes. And here we are seeing the DP is ready, is printed, and we also see the dev SQLite is right here. Now let's start with our model. Let's say we will have a user table in this database. So creating a user module. And for this one, first we are going to get the model from the dependency Sequelize. And this is one of the options to create our models. And this is a class. And let's call this one is user. And this is extending this model. The Sequelize is having other ways to define the models, but in the end these are quite similar. So I use this one. Now we have a class and we can use its methods, and we need to initialize our table. And we do that by running user init. And this is taking two parameters. The first one is the attributes of this user table, and the second one is the other options. Now let's define the attributes. So here in this user, let's say we will have a user name field, and we can set the type of this field, and for that one we will need to get the data types from the Sequelize, and the type for this username is going to be data types string. And similarly we will have the fields of, let's say, email, and we will have, let's fix the typo here, and we will have the password, and that's going to be string also. And for the second parameter we are passing another object, and this is going to be containing the Sequelize instance of our application, which is created right here. So let's import that one. So we will have the Sequelize coming from this database module, and we pass it right here. And for these options we can set our model name. This is useful in the relationship with the other tables. So let's set our model name as user, and let's export this user from this module. Now we are going to insert users to this user table. So here in the index.js, let's do that. So this application is going to be handling the post request, and these requests will be sent to this endpoint of users. And here we will be having this route handler, which is going to take the request and the response. And in the request body, we will be receiving the user object. This user object will be containing these fields, username, email, and password. And we will be saving this user data to database. And for that, we will be doing this. We will call user, this user modules function. First, let's import that one here. We will have user here, and it's coming from this user module. And we will call user, and it has this create method, and we will pass the object, and that object is coming from request body. Again, this is an asynchronous operation, so we will get the result in this then block, and after we receive this, after the insertion is completed, this method will be executed, and in this method we can say we would like to send the message user is inserted. So let's save this one. Now we are going to send a request to our application, and we are going to use the Postman for this one. We are going to send the request to this endpoint. The application is running on port 3000, and our endpoint is this one, users. And we are going to send a post request, and in this post request we will have a body of user object. Let's create it right here. This is going to be a JSON request, and the user is like this. It has the username field, email, and the password fields, which are actually the values we are looking for right here. So let's send a request. Here it is saying the user is inserted. So our code is working right here. It is inserting the user, then it is showing the user is inserted message. But how we can make sure the user is there? One of the options is to open this SQLite file with a browser, and in VS Code I have this extension SQLite Explorer. So here if I open this database right here, and if I query the user table, here it is showing the table. We have one data inserted to this table, but all the fields are actually null. And also we have this columns of the created at and updated at. Let's fix the first issue, why the fields are null. Because the Express does not know how to parse the incoming request body. We are looking to receive the request body right here, but it is not processing that one. To make Express aware of the bodies, we are going to use a middleware, and that is coming with the Express. So we will tell our application is going to use a middleware, and that middleware is this express.json. Let's save this one. Now the application is restarted. Now let's send one more request. We are receiving 200 OK with the user inserted. Let's run the query once again. And here we are seeing the user is inserted, and we have this ID, username, email, password fields are filled properly. Now you may be asking why we have this created at and the updated at columns. This is a default behavior of the Sequelize. When we define our model, it is adding this ID and the created at and updated at fields automatically. We can ask Sequelize not to do that by using this option object here, and the option is this one. We can say timestamps to be false, so it's not going to be adding the timestamp to our table. But also, since the database is persisted, this is not going to be removing these columns. So we can enforce the database to be recreated right here in the Sequelize sync command we are running here in the index.js, and we can tell we want this schema of our models here in the code to be reflected to the database, and we want this to be forced. Let's save this and see the result. So this is going to be clearing all the data from database. So if I run the query once again, here the table is empty now. And if I go to Postman and send a request, here it is showing only the username, email, password, and the ID. So that's how we can insert the data to the database. Also, let's do a refactor right here. This is a function having a promise in it. Instead of using the promise like this then block, we can use the async await. So let's say this is an async function, and now we can use this await at this line. We can wait this user create to be completed. Then after that, without having this then function, we can say then after this line is completed, then do this part. Saving this again. The application is restarted, and here you can see the table is dropped because of this force through. then create it once again, so the table will be empty. Let's send a request. We receive the success response, and if we query, we are still seeing the user in the table. Now let's add the other functionalities. Let's add the get functionality for retrieving all the users. Again, this is going to be having the user, this user model function, which is going to be asynchronous. So let's mark our function as async. And in this one, we are going to return all the users in the database. So let's get the users first, and we run user find all method. So this is going to be returning all the users, and then we can send a response having this users. Saving it. Now sending a request with Postman, and sending a request with Postman once again, but this time for the get. And here we are seeing the user one is there. If we send the request multiple times, it's going to be inserting this user multiple times, and here we are receiving this user information like this, ID 1, 2, 3, 4. So this is returning all the users in the database. Let's also add one more endpoint, and this is going to be for, again, a get endpoint. But this one, let's get the specific user. So we will use the user's ID. And again, we will use the async. Now we are going to use this ID somewhere in the user function. And based on that ID, we will be returning only that user. So first thing is we have this ID coming from the request params ID, and we will run user find one. This is going to be returning only one user, and for this function we can pass the option, and in this option we can define where the ID column is equal to the ID value we are having here. Let's rename this one. Let's say requested ID. To make it more readable, let's do it like this. And this is going to be returning back the user object. And then we can send this user data back to our client. Saving it. Again, the table is empty. Sending a request with Postman. So this is returning this user. We just add this one. This was for all users. Now if I type the user ID like this, user one, here I'm receiving the user object. And if I type non-existing user, here I'm receiving an empty body. So there is no such user in database. Now let's complete the other REST endpoints. So let's add an endpoint for update. So this is going to be users, again, ID. And we will have the request, the response. Again, we will get the user, just copying it from the previous function. By the way, we don't need this anymore. Closing this one. So here we are retrieving the user from database first. Then in the request body, we will be receiving, let's say, the username. So we will just update the user's username. So let's say user, this is the user we are pulling from the database. This user's username is going to be the value coming from request body, and this body is a JSON, and in this JSON we will have the username. So we are setting the value. Now we need to update the table, and for that one we are going to use this user instance we got here, and it has a save method. So that's how we can update an existing entity in the table. Then we can send a response, and let's say this is updated. Let's save this one. Again, going back to Postman, sending a request. The user is inserted. This is going to be user 1, and here we have the user 1. Now we are going to send a request for this endpoint, and this time we are going to send a put request, and we will have a body of JSON, which will be having a username. And this username, let's say we are updating this user 1's username like this, user-1. Currently it is user 1, there is no dash in it. And now I'm sending this request, and here it is saying updated. And if I get the user, here I see the user name is updated. And let's add our final endpoint, and that's for the delete operation. Let's delete this user. So we will have a delete endpoint. We will be handling the request coming to this user's ID, and we will have the request response in this function. Again, we are going to use the requested ID, but this time instead of pulling the user with the find one method, we will just run user models destroy method, and in this destroy, just like this find one, we can pass an object for the where clause. So this is going to be destroying the entity which has this ID, and then we can send a response saying that it is remote. Saving this one. Again, going back to Postman, inserting the user. We have this user, and all I do is just send a delete request to this endpoint. This does not care about the body. So sending a request. Here we are receiving the removed, and if I go to here, now the user is not there. And if I try to get all users, we are receiving empty array. So that's how we can use Sequelize in an Express application. And we can extend the functionality, and we have relationship with the other models, and we can use fully functional relational databases in our Node applications with Sequelize. So thanks for watching, and hope to see you in next tutorials.